What is a mountain bike going to look like in 10 years' time? What do you think, Tom?
I've got absolutely no idea, so I went to ChatGPT and Google Gemini to find out what a mountain bike is going to look like in 2035. Okay, well, so I typed into ChatGPT and Google Gemini, what is a mountain bike going to look like in 2035? Because I was kind of interested as what things are going to be like. And obviously it has scraped the web. That's what ChatGPT does, right? It goes around the internet and finds different people saying different things and condenses it into actually quite an interesting list. I got the list and then I gave it to Warren Rosti, who's our road colleague, who's actually a really good little artist, and he's come up with some pretty cool drawings. Look, here's one of them. So he's drawn what AI thinks a mountain bike's going to look like in 10 years' time. So I thought, let's go through it, let's chat about the different concepts and ideas that are there, see what we think about them. First up though, big shout out to Pip & Co, our preferred donut supplier here in Bristol. You can't do a video in the studio without some donuts. Number one, ChatGPT and Google Gemini reckon we're going to have ultra-light, ultra-strong frames, which sounds like a bit of a given, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that with modern carbon frames, I think you could kind of cover that off with both of them, and it's not particularly surprising to me to hear that.
No, I mean, they're suggesting that we're going to use 3D printing there, so kind of like Atherton does with their downhill bikes and their trail bikes, using materials like titanium used to create customizable, lightweight frames with precise geometry adjustments. I guess if you're 3D printing things, you can put in rider data to ensure that the bikes are exactly what the rider wants, the right geometries, the right angles, everything sort of in the right place.
And like you say, that's what Atherton bikes already do. For a surcharge, you can end up with a bike that is completely custom to you.
On top of the 22 sizes that they already offer. Pretty wild. They're also suggesting that we're going to have graphene reinforced composites or next gen carbon nanotube blends. I'm pretty sure I've heard the term nanotubes and graphene in the bike space before, but I'm not quite sure where I have.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. I mean, I know there's certainly different kinds of carbon fibre that we're seeing. So forged carbon fibre is one, where you sort of mould thermoplastic with strands of carbon fibre in. And I guess this graphene and nanotubes is just taking it down to a more molecular level. So stronger materials, lighter.
I think perhaps more usefully in terms of what we might see is built-in impact sensors to detect frame stresses and fatigue before it becomes a crack. Now, people crash. A lot of forces go through the frame and you can't really see it, and you know, frames do fail.
Yeah, I think with an aluminium or steel frame, you can see dents and you can see the stress marks around it. You can see cracks propagating more easily than you can in something like carbon. So having that stress, what was it, electronic stress monitor?
Yeah.
Having that in the frame is going to tell you if your frame is damaged and the fibres and the strands that are joined together in the frame are suffering and degrading in a way that you can't see with the naked eye.
Now, a few things that Warren added himself to the drawing that I sort of quite liked. We've got integrated aero fender on the back and on the front as well. Now, aero is something that we don't really talk about too much in mountain biking, but I think the next couple of years we're going to really see it. So he's added those in there. I think that's kind of cool. And he's also added them over the disc brake thing. Now, you did an article on Bike Radar recently about J-Tech Suspension's disc brake covers for intense factory racing's downhill team?
That's it. So they've integrated a disc cover on the front and another on the back. And the idea of that is it's not specifically to do with aero. It's to keep the heat in the brakes and keep the mud and the water off them in wet weather. But they did say that there is scope to have aero optimized disc covers in the future. So it's something they're already thinking about.
Okay, well that's pretty cool, and maybe Warren is ahead of his time. He's also got quite deep rims on there. So the other thing that Warren has added onto this, I actually quite like, is a bayonet fit fork to enhance head tube aerodynamics. Now, obviously, Woz is a bit of a roadie, so aerodynamics do play a large part of what he thinks about. But basically, it's kind of like a dual crown or a triple clamp or a dual crown fork, but it goes around the front, so a bit of extra structural rigidity on there. Quite like that. You see it on road bikes. Cervelo, I think, are doing it on their race bikes.
Yeah, Colnago as well. So I think the idea is to make a bigger aerofoil coming further from the front of the bike. So it would have aero benefits. And I think we have seen downhill riders like Ace of Amet in the wind tunnel in photos. So it is something that manufacturers are thinking about at the top end of mountain biking, which could trickle down into the bikes that we buy.
Now, everyone loves suspension on a mountain bike. It makes you go faster, it makes you go better. And these days, there is some pretty cool suspension tech. So there's obviously Live Valve from Fox. and the one a lot of people have heard of, flight attendant from RockShox, where it analyses the trail conditions, how much power you're putting in, whether you're going up and down a hill. It wouldn't take too much of a stretch for AI to predict that suspension is going to get even smarter.
So it's like a suite of components. So your fork, your shock, the power meter in your cranks, they all talk to each other and optimize the suspension in order for it to perform better for you on the trail. So you're looking at saving energy when you're climbing or when you're pedaling, but also the suspension fully opening up when you need it.
Yeah, and you don't have to think about it. So it's pretty smart already. However, the next generation of this is, instead of being reactive, which is what flight attendant and live valve are now, it becomes proactive, I guess. So, ChatGPT reckons AI-driven real-time suspension adjustment based on terrain, speed, rider style, and fatigue levels. Now, this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later because there is sort of some more biometric data being involved. But if your suspension knows that you're about to go and hit like a really rough section of trail, it might sort of adjust the rebound or the compression damping to ensure that it stays high in its travel and it can cope with everything. If it knows that you're on a smooth trail with one big hit, maybe it's going to open things up again, so it really soaks up that hit and then instantly takes it back tight again. There's a lot of that could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps there's even scope for something from the automotive industry where cars use cameras to sense the things on the road in front of you and react to that, like automatic braking. If that technology progressed to the point where it was able to see bumps in the trail, then it could really be proactive. Instead of sensing what the fork is doing now, it could look ahead down the trail. Obviously, this is future tech, but
yeah,
the speed at which it's progressing, there could be something like that in 2035.
I guess what we're not saying is that we want all of these things. I don't know if I really want that, but there's potential for this.
It could exist.
Okay, smart stuff. Okay, now, e-bikes are a thing that we cannot avoid. I think in 10 years' time, there's still going to be an awful lot of people riding a manual, acoustic, meat bike, whatever you want to call it. I count myself among those people. But e-bikes are going to continue to be really popular. And AI reckons we're going to have integrated electric assist, but stealthy. So near invisible motors and batteries hidden in the frame. I guess everything is getting smaller and more compact. I don't know how much battery tech is going to change in 10 years, but you can, if we're seeing more and more batteries coming into the automotive world, like you mentioned, that are getting more and more energy dense, potentially they're going to get a little bit smaller.
Yeah, you can see why AI would think we're going down that path. If you looked back at bikes from, say, 10 years ago, you can see that the motors are getting smaller and smaller, closer around the bottom bracket, and batteries are becoming more integrated into down tubes. So it's not a stretch to imagine that that trend would continue.
And I guess if you can pack more efficiency and torque into a smaller package, that just helps those motors actually get, they're what, a couple of kilos now? They were quite a bit more than that 10 years ago. As you said, the first gen e-bikes looked terrible, and they look pretty good now.
They do. They're a little bit bigger, but depending on the paint job the manufacturers choose, they can actually look very much in proportion with bigger 29-inch wheels, longer frames. They are getting really attractive looking.
Yeah. An interesting thing that has been talked about in cycling for a long time, but has never happened, and I don't know if it ever will, really, but we talked about this a second ago, was regenerative braking. So when you stop, obviously energy is moved from your momentum into heat and sometimes noise if you've got a particularly noisy set of brakes. That energy potentially could be pulled out of the system and put back into the motor to help extend your ride. It's never going to fully regenerate it, like a car can't either.
Something I've heard of being worked on in the space at the moment is using the heat from the brakes to charge the Axis or Di2 batteries, so for your electric gears or your electric dropper or your flight attendant. That's very much in the research stage at the moment, but again, it's a really fascinating area of regenerative braking, using that wasted heat energy to go back into the bike. And that's not even necessarily for an e-bike. That's just for something with electric gears.
Yeah, I guess the energy capture from that maybe isn't going to be enough to really charge a big 1,000 watt-hour battery particularly. Warren did include that, of course, on his images, front and back, although I think he used one of them for recharging the battery and the other one for recharging, or like your friend is trying to develop, all the onboard electronics to keep them running without you having to keep charging your lights and your GPSs and your suspension systems and all that sort of stuff. Like, I like all this electronic stuff. Like, I love, access gears, and flight attendant's pretty cool when it's working with how you want it to work, but my long-term bike has got mechanical gears and no fancy suspension, and I quite like it.
Yeah, call me old school. I like the feel of your shifter, the sort of organic feedback you're getting from the gear cable moving and pushing against the mech. But maybe we're dinosaurs, I don't know.
Maybe so, maybe so. One of the ideas in this that I really liked, I'm going to pull this out for the camera again, is some stuff with the helmets. So on the back of the one at the top, we've got an SOS sensor and alert tech. Now, we are seeing things like this. Specialized Angie has got it. There's a few more, Reese Wilson is racing with these on his team. I forget the name of it, 6D maybe. So that's kind of cool stuff. It'll link to your Garmin or your GPS units and ping the safety people. But the one I really liked was a heads-up display in your goggles. Now, on Warren's description there, we have, all sorts of data. You've got trail conditions and like mapping on there, so it kind of pre-telling you that you've got a corner coming up. That's pretty smart. But it can also have all sorts of other bits of data in there. So we've got navigation, upcoming gradients, and performance metrics. So it might be able to have your heart rate in there, so you can see if you're going a bit too hard, maybe your power on there if you're cross-country racing, for example. It might be able to tell you your gear selection, your suspension settings, and all those sort of bits of data just in your periphery, because we have that again in cars.
Well, also in bikes, as early as 20 years ago, Shimano were developing a heads-up display. And one of the weirdest parts of that is they had like a retinal sensor.
Okay.
So it was looking at your eyes. And if you glanced up or glanced down, it could be programmed to shift up and shift down. And
really?
Yeah, that was something that was happening years and years ago. I remember reading about it in MBUK magazine. So if that's something that's in development, then there's no reason we couldn't see that with something like the technology that's in Google Glass or something like that.
Yeah.
It's all there, it's just who's going to put it together in a way that works.
Would you want some sort of trail hazard popping up in your vision as you're riding along, or do you like to sort of be a bit more reactive yourself?
I think I'm pretty old school, but I can see the advantage of having an extra pair of eyes looking down the trail in case someone's stopped on top of a trail feature and it's going to let me know in advance. Okay. Or, think about a bike park. You've already got signs that say, caution, drop coming up. Imagine if that was an alert that came up on your goggles instead. It could be good for safety.
Hopefully fairly see-through alert so you can actually still see what's going on.
Yeah.
I guess if it was just like ping up somewhere up here, I'd be kind of down with that, I reckon. I think we're both kind of into that one. Okay, now there's going to be advanced drivetrains according to ChatGPT. Very sexy. Maintenance-free, sounds good to me because I hate maintaining drivetrains. Enclosed gearboxes instead of derailleur systems. Gearboxes is a perennial topic. I've been reading MBUK since 2001, okay? And gearboxes, constantly, it's the next big thing, it's going to happen. Shimano are going to do it, SRAM's going to do it. No one's done it, come on. Maybe it's going to happen in the next 10 years. And certainly ChatGPT thinks so. There are obviously, this is kind of been a big year for gearboxes with the whole downhill scene, keeping that weight low and central, improving ride characteristics, kind of a big thing in racing.
And something that fits in with a gearbox, which is like a peripheral benefit, is if you don't have to have a derailleur shifting a chain down a cassette, you can have like a setup with just two cogs, which allows you to run a belt. And belts are truly maintenance free. They need no lubrication and they're quieter and lighter as well. And that is why we've seen this move in downhill racing to gearboxes, I think, because manufacturer Gates are offering a significant amount of money to the first rider to win a World Cup on a Gates belt drive system. And you can't use a derailleur, so it's got to be single speed or have a gearbox.
The other thing that sort of was mentioned along this was short cranks and high bars has sort of been jammed into this. Now, short cranks is something that is, again, increasingly talked about in the world of cycling at the moment. So it's no wonder that AI has scraped this from around the internet and said, yes, short cranks. But, 150mm cranks, probably not too difficult to sort of see, that happening. Keeps up with the ground clearance, especially if you're running a lower bottom bracket for a more aggressive setup, potentially. And yeah, so there's a whole biometric thing of like smaller circles potentially being better for your legs than bigger ones.
Yeah, I remember a former staff member, Seb, was very much into explaining how you could get the same amount of energy into the floor from a shorter crank than a longer crank. Something to do with RPM, torque versus horsepower and things. Science. But from riding a bike with shorter cranks, it does feel nicer in some ways. You do feel more balanced, I think.
Okay.
And on top of that, if you're on an e-bike, you want to keep that boost, keep that drive going, and not have to stop pedaling to go over obstacles. So you can either run more overrun and sort of do little cranks, or you can keep the cranks spinning if they're shorter, even as you're riding over obstacles.
Interesting. Okay, we're back to the world of electronics again, because connectivity and something that I think might interest you, AI coaching. So we're going to have full Bluetooth 5G links to ride tracking platforms and real-time coaching feedback based on your power input, posture and heart rate. And again, this is something that Warren has very kindly drawn over on this picture down here. So on the handlebars, you've got he's done an integrated display into the handlebars. Now there is a few companies sort of trying to get this off the ground at the moment. It hasn't quite happened yet, but that could hold a whole host of bits of data. He's gone for tire monitoring, suspension settings, and trail mode. But there's no reason why it couldn't offer some tips or sort of help modify the bike in some way to help make sure that you're on the bike and doing things properly.
And worth mentioning at this point that ShockWiz and TireWiz is already a thing you can buy. So you plug it into your suspension, this is ShockWiz we're talking about, and that gives you feedback on what suspension settings you could be running and how your suspension is working, even without loads of telemetry and computers and wires strapped to your bike, just a very small piece. So in 10 years' time, goodness knows that could be integrated into every bike.
Yeah, 100%. You talked about TireWiz just then, because self-tuning tyre systems is our penultimate thing that AI came up with for the bike of 2035. Again, it's technology that we have kind of seen where there's like a compressor housed in the hub, and then it sort of sends an airline up to the valve and it can change the tyre pressures as you're going. Can you see this being useful?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's something perhaps we've seen in military vehicles, so something that was very heavy and robust and would work. And then suddenly we saw it in bicycles. So I think some riders were using it on the Paris-Roubaix. So like proper big time racing where weight is really important and they're varying their tyre pressures in real time. So yeah, I mean, if it's already being used on the road, why not on mountain bikes in 10 years' time?
I guess when you're watching the World Cup downhill, you see the likes of Bruni playing around with his funny little buttons on his handlebars, and those are to adjust the suspension to ensure that, if he's on a motorway section, it's all firmed up and he can sprint and pump and generate a load of speed, and then he can turn it off and it's nice and supple as soon as he's going over the rough stuff. I guess it would be the same sort of thing, if you're on a motorway section, maybe have slightly higher pressures to sort of help with that efficiency, and then maybe when you come into something a bit rougher where there's, traction is limited, you might drop the pressures a little bit. I wonder how quick it could do it though, because it's going to need to be fairly efficient.
I mean, we've seen a switch of riders moving away from things like inserts because we were still seeing tyres blow off the rim, say 5 years ago, even with riders running inserts. So some riders are, some riders aren't, but there's a general shift away. So perhaps this is the next piece of technology in order to keep tyres on rims, which is, a perennial problem.
Yeah. Now, the final one is biometric integration. So this is your biome, your body, integrating with the bike. So I guess you're going to be wearing some sort of like heart rate sensor, maybe a glucose sensor, maybe, VO2 max, all the sort of fancy stuff that you kind of just about getting a watch these days, but more integrated and integrating into the bike and how it performs. So built-in health monitoring, heart rate hydration, fatigue prediction, and then safety features like automatic crash detection and SOS beacons, which you briefly talked about with the helmet. I think this is quite an interesting proposition because if you've got a bike system that is able to understand that your body is perhaps getting fatigued, it might be able to sort of gently change the setup of the bike to benefit you. So if you're on a cross-country race bike, for example, you're sprinting around, you might want quite an aggressive setup to make it as efficient as possible. But when you get tired, you start to make little mistakes, okay? And maybe here, you're better off having a slightly softer suspension, maybe a tiny little bit less air pressure in those tyres, just to help you get away with those mistakes, even if it's not quite as efficient.
Yeah, and what about if something could monitor, say, your blood lactate level, so how fatigued you were getting? We've already got automatic gears on e-bikes. So imagine if you had automatic gears and it could vary your cadence based on how tired your legs were, for example.
Yeah.
That could be really useful in real time.
Or maybe boost the power in the motor just to help make sure you get home, because you've already sort of got your route in your computer. It already knows exactly where you want to go and what hills are coming and how much you weigh and all this sort of stuff. So it could be like, well, I know that you're going to get a bit tired after like first 2 or 3 hours, so we'll save a little bit extra in reserve and just give you a little bit more of a boost towards the end of your ride. Ultimately, it could also just pop up on your very fancy onboard display, eat something.
Yeah, very simple prompt. It's something that's hard to remember when you're riding, and nobody likes to bonk in the middle of a ride.
Nobody likes to bonk. There we go. Okay, well, so ChatGPT and Google Gemini, I'll give them both credit, have given us what they think a bike's going to look like in 2035. Are there any things on there that you really want, or any that you really don't want?
Well, I definitely like keeping it simple. So maybe I'm old school and out of date, and the kids these days, the bikes they're going to want in 10 years' time aren't what I want. But I like a bike that is reliable, lightweight, perhaps a bit less in terms of like electronics than perhaps AI is predicting. So I'd still like a bike that's really light and strong, those amazing frame characteristics that have been talked about, and really good suspension as well. So perhaps different oils, different seals, things to reduce the friction. But yeah, I feel like probably a lot of that bio-integration is probably not for me. I just like to keep it simple.
Okay. I'd agree that I like the frame stuff. The fact that we could all have a completely custom frame built exactly for our body shapes and sizes and riding styles and preferences is pretty cool. And there are brands that are already doing this at the top end. But imagine if this could be brought down to the lower end. That would be pretty cool. I like the heads-up display stuff. Like, I think from even just from my usability point of view, the navigation of not having to keep looking down at my computer, I quite like that that could come in. What I don't want it to do, though, is keep telling me that there's a rock coming up and I have to be careful. Bore off. The final thing that I wanted to talk about, after I asked ChatGPT what the mountain bike of the future is going to look like, it said, do you want to know what your mountain bike ride of the future is going to look like?
Ooh.
Hell yeah, I do. Right, so this is what it reckons your morning ride is going to look like in 2035.
Hit me.
6:30. 6:30 in the morning. Pre-ride wake-up call. If AI wakes me up at 6:30 in the morning to go on a bike ride, I'm getting my hammer, because it's not happening. Your helmet's built-in AI assistant gently wakes you up with a weather report, air quality and trail conditions synced from satellite data. That's kind of cool. The bike's onboard system has already charged itself overnight from yesterday's regenerative braking and a few hours in the garage's solar dock. At 7:15, auto-tune and terrain preview. As soon as you wheel the bike out, it wakes from sleep mode. The AI scans today's plan trail from your route app and pre-adjusts suspension, the firmness of fire road climbs. The tyre pressures, maybe it's lowered because it's a bit damp, so it wants a bit more grip. And it's optimized your gears in the enclosed gearbox, which I'm presuming might be a bit more like a CVT, so it's, maybe it's not so set in its ratios. 8 o'clock on the trail, 10 o'clock on the trail. Start the climb. The stealth assist motor engages only when your cadence drops below optimal, keeping your heart rate in the perfect training zone. A heads-up display in your visor shows real-time wattage gradient and energy burn forecast. The bike's micro generators power a steady glow for your handlebar lights. No battery anxiety here. At 8:30, you hit a technical section. Before you even reach a rocky section, the GPS-triggered suspension system softens up. The AR HUD outlines the best line choice over obstacles, heightening loose rocks in red, flagged by others who have ridden it before. That's going to be one of those annoying things where it's like, you see it on like sci-fi stuff where there's like, or computer games where it's like, bah, 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 on a rock.
Well, they spray paint them.
They spray paint them.
Racing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
That's already happening. Fortunately, at 9 a.m, you hit an epic descent. As you drop into a long downhill, the bike's regen braking tops up the power reserve. The AI subtly modulates brake force to avoid wheel lock. We're seeing that with Bosch, they're already doing that stuff, although it's not AI. While also giving you vibration cues through the handlebars if your speed is too high for the next corner. At 9:15, there's an unexpected moment. Sorry, it's pretty wild. You clip a route and take a small tumble. The bike's onboard accelerometer detects the crash, and since you're up and fine, it cancels the emergency SOS that would have pinged your GPS location to your emergency contact. At 9:45, you head home. On the fire road, the AI stiffens suspension for efficiency and slightly increases tyre pressure for faster rolling. Your visor displays your performance summary, hydration status, and recovery suggestions. And then at 10:15, your post-ride wrap-up. Back at home, the bike automatically syncs your ride to your training platform, gives a wear report for brake pads and tyres, that's kind of cool, and recommends the next trail for your skill level. I quite like the sort of the wrapping up thing at the end. There are sort of tech out there, so Cannondale, for example, they've got a little on-wheel sensor that links with your GPSs and stuff, and that sort of tracks how much riding you've been doing on the bike and gives you a little heads up of like, oh, you might need to service your suspension or change your bottom bracket, that sort of thing.
Wow, so those things are already here?
In a less AI way, but in a more like this is measured and reactive way, yeah.
I think the thing that struck me about that is, apart from the heads-up display with like looking out for rocks and things, a lot of those things are going to happen in the background. So it sounds like a lot is going on and there's a lot to think about. But perhaps if your bike is selecting gears for you and perhaps telling you that your frame's damaged or something like that, it's going to happen in the background. You're not going to notice those AI programs working. So it could be a lot less intrusive than it sounds like when it's read out like that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. Perhaps that is what the AI bike of the future is going to look like.
Definitely drop some comments down below if you agree or disagree. It's not our opinions, it's AI, so don't get angry with us. If you enjoyed our video about bikes of the future, then why not watch our podcast with Chris Porter? Here's a man who always looks to the future and is a really interesting chat. It's on screen now.